Yeah.
All right, so this week we begin with Shemot, also known as Exodus in the Western world, chapter 29, verse 9, which in English literally says, "And belt you with them, belt Aharon and sons his, and bind you to them turbans, and was her to them priesthood to statute eternal, and setting their hand Aharon and his sons, and sons his." All right. Not as confusing as it sounded, but it's vechagarta and belt you. I use the word belt, but it's more like tie, restrain, tie up. They use the word gird. I hate that word. It's an old fogey fashioned term, which will probably be all in vogue in a few years. But it's to bind up their clothing, if you will, with a belt. Oh, Tom, bind, it's the word et that has no meaning, and it's a pointer, but they've added the mem to the end of it, so we'll say with them. And this is avnet. Well, there's your word for belt. And they say such as the priest and other nobles wore. Why? Because poor people couldn't afford a rope? Come on now. Anyway, Aharon, that's the brother of Moshe. And this is Uvanav and his sons. So you're going to put, see to it that they all put on a belt. Then this is Vehavashta, and bind you. That's to bind, to, if you put a headband on and tie it in the back, you bind that headband. And so he's saying bind the turban, which I guess will be what the next word to then. What's the next word after the next word? But you're going to wrap this thing around. You're going to make sure it stays on their head. That's the point in using this word, is that some way, somehow it's going to be tied on to where it'll have a better chance of staying on. Doesn't mean that it would never fall off, because then you'd have to sew it onto someone's head, and that's not the idea. All right, it says lahem, to them, migbaot. So there's the turban in plural. And they say the mitre, headdress, hat of the common priest, so called from its round form. It's what you've seen before. They still wear it in the Middle East, and taxi drivers you see sometimes doing that. I know that when I went to California and when I went to New York, there was always one of the taxi drivers wearing one of these. It looks like a rag that's just been wrapped around on the top of the head. That's exactly what they're talking about. And yes, that does come from Jewish culture. You don't see very many, if any, of them wearing it anymore, but this is the headdress of the Jews. Then the haita, which is literally and was her. It's to be, to exist, and all that, and it's in the feminine. And it says, because the turban is spoken of in the feminine, it's not the men. Then it says lahem, to them. So this is going to establish them, if you will, kahuna. You hear kahuna, the big kahuna? Yeah, I think that's where this comes from. Priesthood, the office or function of the priest. So the big kahuna was what? The high priest. I'm just saying, you probably didn't know that, but there you go. Let's see, what are those words? Yemen, and what's that other place? I can't think of it. There are two places, the names of which are very popular, Yemen and the other place. I don't know why it's slipping my head, because it's not the use of the word for left that I think of. But Yemen, to the right, and then the other word for the left, because one is to the right of Israel, one's to the left of Israel. That's where those names came from. Anyway, a lot more Hebrew in our world than we think. Lehukat, it's going to be for a statute. It establishes, it is a law or an ordinance, and this is olam. So it's an eternal ordinance. It's an eternal statute. It's a law that will last forever. So that headdress establishes this law, this thing forever. Umelata, and setting there, and their setting. To fulfill, to make, the original idea of that is that of abundance or overflowing. And then it says yad. So it establishes the hand, Aharon of Aaron, Veya, and the hand, Banav, of his sons. And you got to know that's a Hebrew idiom, right? And you bind them with a belt. So make sure they have a belt. Aharon, and by the way, their belt did not have a buckle back then. So that's not what they're talking about. Their belt would have been more like what you see on a bathrobe, something that you tied up, thus the binding of the belt. So you bind them with a belt, Aharon and his sons, and you bind their turbans, and the priesthood will be to them an eternal statute. So it will always belong to the Levites. And consecrate their power, their position, their office, their yad. So you establish their yad, their power, their position. So you consecrate the power, their position of Aharon, and the power or position of his sons. So of the words an eternal statute, Rashi said that this verse limited the priesthood to the family of Aharon, in other words, the Levites. And he would be correct about that. Verse 10 is literally would be, and make come you, so it's in bring, and you bring, the young bull to faces, or to the opening, to the beginning, before the tent of the appointed times, and lean, Aharon and sons his, hands them upon head, the young bull. Surprisingly, this one's going to bring up a lot of stuff. So it starts off with Vehi ke ravta, and make come you, so and bring. So you're going to lead them to some place. Et, that's your pointer. So what are you going to bring? Hapar, the young bull, especially a young bullock, from the idea of a young bull drawing a cart. Lipne, to the faces, in the presence of, before, that's how they say it. Oh, hell, there's your word for tent or tabernacle, moed. So before the tent of the appointed times, because moed is a set time. It's a point in time, especially of a festival day, the feast of God, the festival sacrifices of space and time. So you get the idea. They say an assembly, a place in which an assembly is held, an appointed sign, a signal, but you get the idea, the tent of the appointed times. Then it says, Vesamach, samach, hear it? That's a letter in the alphabet, and this is what it means, to place or lay something upon anything so that it may rest upon and be supported by it. To lay the hand on anything so as to lean upon the hand, to uphold, to sustain, to aid, to approach. And then it says, Aharon, there's your name of Aaron, Uvanav, and his sons. So they're going to lean et Yedehem. This is Yad in plural, Yedehem. Their hands, al, which is upon, rosh, that's the head. In this particular word, that's literal too. Hapar, they're going to lean their hands on the head of the young bull. So, and you make come, so you bring the young steer, which is what the young bull is, before. Remember, it said two faces, so before the tent of appointed times. And Aharon and his sons will lean their hands on the head of the young steer. So we got to talk about the lean their hands. What are we talking about? Even Ezra wrote that there were those who believed that Aharon and his sons laid their hands on the animals at the same time, while others believed they did it one after another. There is evidence of the infinitive here. It goes on and on and on. It could be that Aharon did this by himself during his inaugural ceremony with his actual children as witnesses. Also, his sons, if in the infinitive, would more likely be those who became high priest after him. And they may have done the same when they were inaugurated to the same office. Do you guys follow? Does that make sense? Okay. So we'll move on to 11. Slaughter the young bull, 2 faces Yahweh, so before Yahweh, entrance tent appointed times. That's where you're going to slaughter it. Bishachata, and slaughter. To slay an animal, especially a victim, a sacrifice. Okay, then it's et, which is a pointer, hapar. So you're going to slaughter the bull, the young steer. Lipne, it's 2 faces, or before the faces, it's in the presence of. Those maybe makes more sense. And then it gives the proper name of God. Then it says petach. So you're going to do this in the presence of God, where petach, at the entrance, an opening, an entrance. Hence, at the entrance of the gate of a city, in the gate of a town or a village, and in this case, at the entrance of the ohel, which is your next word, the tent, the tabernacle, moed, of the appointed times. So you have slaughter the young steer before Yahweh at the entrance of the tent of appointed times. Even Ezra wrote out a list of this sacrificial process. He said, first, Moshe, acting as priest, slaughtered the steer. 2, Moshe then sprinkled some of the blood on the horns of the altar and then the rest at the base. 3, Moshe then took some of the entrails, burned them on the altar. One of Aharon's sons took the hide and dung and buried it outside the camp. So you got to see verses 11 through 14 to get all this. He's just put it all together here. All right, so let's look at verse 12. And to take you from blood the young bull, and put them upon horns the altar with finger you, and all the blood you shall pour to foundation the altar. All right, so it starts off with belakachta, and to take you. It's from the root word that's to take, to stick together, to adhere, to take to oneself. And so that's used to take a wife. But it's also to send someone after somebody to bring them to you is to take them to you, because to bring and to take would be the same thing here. To receive, to bring, to take, to receive. They're all the same thing from the same word. Just depends on how they're used, right? Then it says midam. So you take from the blood. There's your word that we were talking about earlier with the mem, because the word is dam, and they've added the mem to the front, so it's take from the blood. Hapar. So take from the blood of the bull, venata ta, and put what's literally and put them, because there's not going to be just one drop of blood that comes out, right? So it's in plural because they think of it as bloods, where we would still think of it just as blood. Then it says all, which is upon karnot. Now this is horns. A horn as of an ox, a goat, of a ram, a vessel made of horn, or a horn used for a vessel, a horn for blowing. It's a symbol of strength and power, an image taken from bulls and other horned animals. But it's also the summit of a mountain. That's called the horn of a mountain. The top or top edge of anything, of the top edges of the altar. And this is what we're talking about. So you remember that since sometime after the early on portion of this, men began to take the words of God very literally. And so now all the depictions you see of altars always have horns sticking out of them. Well, there are other groups in this Middle Eastern area that began to do the same thing, because it all comes from the same place. The Ugaritic and all of that comes from the same place and the same people. So you can see how this becomes intertwined with other religions, and then as it spreads across the world, winds up in all kinds of places. I have extreme doubt as to the altar of God actually having horns sticking out of it. I think that we are talking about the top edge. The top edges of the altar are called the horns, because it was also used of flashes of lightning, just as the Arabian poets compare the first beam of the rising sun to the horns. So it's the coming over the edges. Edges has more to do with it than anything. Then it says Hamis Ba'ak, so that's the altar. Be'etz Ba'echa, so that's with finger you, so with your finger, most likely the forefinger. Then it says Ve'et, which is and then it's the pointer. Kol, which is the word for all. Hadam, so you're going to put a little bit on with the finger, and then it's going to say, and now with all the blood, tishapoch, you shall pour. So first you're dipping and touching, and now you're going to pour. El, it says two, which means two. Yes, so you're going to pour it to the foundation of what? Hamitz Ba'ach, of the altar. So verse 12, and you take from the blood of the young steer and put it on the top edges of the altar with your finger, and all the blood you shall pour to the foundation of the altar. Of the word top edges, or horns, based on the Babylonian Talmud, Zebachim 53a to be specific, and since Rashi was at least seemingly unaware of the horns of the altar being the top edges, he wrote that the blood was to be placed on the top edges of the actual horns. Rashi also believed that there was a pan below the altar to catch the blood. There's nothing from the earlier time period that would even suggest this. This comes from later time period. Anyway, it's thrown in there. Verse 13, and to take you all the fat, the hidden, the midst, and overhang upon the liver, and to the kidneys, and the fat that upon them, the altar, and make burn you. So starts off with velakachta, which we've already had, and to take you, to take, to stick together, to fetch, to receive, so. Et kol, so it's all ha-chelev, all the fat. Metaphorically, it's the best or most excellent of any kind. The fat of the land, in other words, the best of its fruit. But in this case, it's just going to be fat. Ha-mechaseh, all of the hidden fat, all the stuff that's covered up, because it's inside the body. Ha-kerev, that's in the interior. Now it's going to be specific. In the interior, in the middle of. Ve'et, and ha-yoteret. And we have the word overhang. It's that which is redundant, the leftover. All, that means upon or over. Ha-kaved, the liver. So it's all that fat that's left over on the liver. And I did this, and I don't suggest that anyone do this, but I went on the internet and started watching videos of people actually slaughtering goats and sheep. It is a horrible experience, and I don't recommend it to anybody. But there were parts of this verse I could not figure out from the words and from the meanings of the words. Once you see it, it begins to make very clear sense. The liver and the kidneys inside a goat, actually, even a skinny one, actually have a little wad of fat hanging over them. And it's the saying, you cut that off. Cut the fat off of the liver, and eventually it'll say off of the kidneys. This is ve'et shete, that's two, number two, 1 and 2. Ha-kelayot, and the kidneys. So you're going to take that excess fat that is on them both off. So it's 3 parts, the liver and 2 kidneys. So you're going to take all that fat off of it. Then it says ve'et ha-chelev, So it's and the fat asher that alehem that is upon them hamiz be'at. So now you're going to take that fat that you've cut off of them, and that fat that is on them, you will place on the altar. The he ketarta and make burn you. So you're going to make it burn. So remember, this altar has fire under it. This is where you're putting it, and you're going to burn off that fat. So here's what it says. And you take all the fat which is hidden in the midst, the remaining on the liver and the two, or the leftover, I should say, on the liver and the two kidneys, and the fat that is on them, and you make them burn on the altar. So fat which is hidden in the midst. Rashi thought the fat hidden in the midst referred to the membrane around the interior organs, and there is a membrane around it. But that's not fat, and there is fat on those three organs. So I'm not in agreement with Rashi on this one. But there is fat on the liver and the two kidneys, which I just said, which makes it more probable that God was actually speaking of the fat and not the membrane. And I don't know, the membrane may be made of fat, but it didn't look like fat to me at all. It just looked like a membrane. Verse 14, and flesh the young bull, and skin he, and dung he, you shall burn with fire from outside to camp, sin he. So, and that should have sparked a memory from what I read on the 3 steps, because this is part of it. So it starts off with ve'et, so it's and then it points to something, besar, which is flesh. So and flesh, since it's goats, it's going to be their, skin's really not the right word. What's it called?
Hide.
Hide, yeah, hide. And the hide, hapar, that's the young bull, the young steer, ve'et, and oro, the skin or the hide, ve'et, pir, my R didn't roll, it won't, pirsho, the dung, the excrements, the gizzards, the entrails. Is that a good word for it? Tiserof, you shall burn. So you're not supposed to make chitlins out of that stuff. And the ones that I saw, they were literally taking the intestines, and of course goats have like 5 stomachs or something like that, little bitty stomachs, and they would fill the stomach up with water and then squeeze it through those intestines to clean them. And then, of course, cook that. All right, so, but you're going to burn ba'esh with fire, or in fire. Then it's michutz, from outside. This is important. So the nasty, icky parts, you're not supposed to burn those on the altar, because the stuff that's being burned on the altar is people are going to eat that, you know. The fat is put on there for the flavor, but you don't eat the fat. But the entrails and other icky, nasty stuff, that goes outside la mahana, outside the camp. So they would have the camp, you got your tabernacle and you got all the tents around it and all that. They're going to go way outside, away from the people, and burn that stuff out there. Then it says hatat, that's our word for sin, which is to wander from or stumble in Torah observance, which they call the way, which is also called the path of righteousness. But it's from the idea of becoming unclean. So this is not allowable, and if you eat this stuff, then you become unclean. You have committed a sin. So you're taking the unclean part of it, speaking of the animal, outside and having it burned. So it says, and the flesh of the young steer and his skin and his dung you shall burn outside the camp with fire. For it is, of course we would say sin, right? Or we would say it the right way, it is unclean. Of the word burn, Rashi wrote that this was the only time that the blood of this offering was sprinkled on the altar in the court and not in the golden altar inside. However, Haskuni, citing Leviticus 9:11, pointed out that the sin offering was in fact carried out in the courtyard. So Rashi is wrong. Verse 15. And the ram, the one, you shall take and put they, Aharon and sons his, hands them upon head the ram. So remember, there's a young steer and 2 rams. And this is all in the, these are being sacrificed for the inauguration of the priest and the high priest appointment, right? So you only have to make enough food for them. Anywho, that's why there's not so much more. There were a lot of priests. His sons were not just 1 or 2 kids that he happened to have. It was the Levites that were going to work as priests. Those were all the sons. So there was obviously enough there that they needed a whole young steer and 2 rams. That's how that was figured. It wasn't that it's got to be that way every time. It's that that's how much was necessary to feed the ones that were there. Anyway, it says ve'et, and I know some are going to argue against that, but that's how it works for the rest of the time. Why wouldn't it work for this one? Ve'et ha'ayil. So it's and ha'ayil, the ram, and it's the word ayil is it's the idea of the spinny, roundy, curvy horn. That's what it really draws a picture of. Then it says ha'echad. So they'll say the one, but remember the word echad is not just used for the ordinal number 1. It's also used for the word first. So take the first. Tikah, there's the word for take. You're going to take the first one. Vesamhu, and put they, place they, lay they, Aharon, Uvanav, and his sons. So what are they going to place? Et Yedehim. We've already had that. They're going to place their hands all upon Rosh, the head, Ha'ayil, of the ram, and that's it. And you shall take the first ram, and Aharon and his sons will put their hands on the head of the ram. Of the words, the first one, the first or the one ram, because remember, they translated the one ram, and I translated the first ram. Even Ezra wrote that the one ram was whichever one Aharon chose. However, the Hebrew word echad is used both for one and for first. It is more likely that the command is for the first ram. So, anyway. So there was something else I was going to say about that. But remember, you're going to have the same argument. Did one guy put his hands on it? Did all of them put their hands on it? And I think that what is being said here is that every time a priest is inaugurated to the position of high priest, and perhaps even every time a priest is inaugurated to the position of priest, so it's probably something you do once a year for sure for the priests, and maybe you only reinstate new priests every time there's a new high priest instated. But each time that's done, then the hands will be laid on. But it doesn't mean that everybody lays their hands on. It's the ones who are working in this position that do it. Those are the sons. I hope you know what I'm talking about. Verse 16, slaughter the ram, and to take you, blood he, and scatter you upon the altar round about. So it's veshachata. So it's and slaughter, that's the slaying of the animal, et ha'ayil, the ram, velakachta, and to take you, so you take et damo, the blood of it. It's, the O at the end is he or it. Those are the same word in Hebrew. Vezarachta, and scatter. It's like you take dust and you throw it into the wind. It scatters it. more often of liquid things to sprinkle, such as water. Kind of sounds a little too Catholic to me. I think we get the wrong idea. It's not take your fingers and sprinkle it over a baby's head. No, this is a scatter. And think about it. What Moshe do? He dipped that thing made out of hyssop and all that and slung it. That's more the idea you're going to get here. Then it's up all, which is on, ha meets ba'ak. So you're going to scatter it on the altar, saviv, round about it, all around the top. You're just going to scatter it all over the top of it. So the first one, you dip your finger in it from the bull. You dip your finger in it and touch a little bit of the top, and then you pour it all over, all the way down to the foundation. This one, you're just going to scatter it round about. You know, it can be on the top. It could be on the sides. None of that would matter. Just scatter it around it. So you have slaughter the ram, and you take its blood and scatter it round about the altar. All right. So verse 17. And the ram you shall divide to divide his, and wash you mitzti and legs his, and give you upon divide his, and upon head he. All right. So the et and ha'ayil and the ram, tena te'ach, you shall divide. So we're still talking about the first ram, right? You're going to cut it up. You're going to divide it up into pieces, right? Lena tachaib, to divide, to cut into pieces. So you have the same word. You shall divide to divide his. So let's cut it up into a whole bunch of pieces, right? Because it's saying it twice. Then it says the rahatzta, and wash you. So you're going to wash all of these pieces off. You're not just going to leave them all nasty and icky. Then it says kirbo, all of the stuff that's in the midst of it, all of the kidneys and the liver and, you know, all that stuff that's in the midst of it. Ucheraiv, which is, and the legs, venatata, and give you and place you and set you, and you will set. It's to set, to put, to place, to make a covenant even, because that establishes, right? It says all, which is upon, netahiv, all of its divided pieces, ve'al, and upon rosho, and upon the head. So, what does it mean? Here's the translation. And you shall cut the ram into pieces, and you will wash his middle and his legs, and you will place it with his pieces and with his head. I was a little surprised by this one, to cut the animal with, you know, because it talks about cooking the animal with its head, its legs, and its head, which is idiomatically used for the whole thing. But in watching those videos, I discovered that one of the chefs highly recommended that you cook the meat with the head. Now, he was obviously either doing this for Jews or was a Jew and did it the Jewish way, because of the way he cut the animal up and the way he prepped it was all very much in line with what the scriptures say right here. And he did, in fact, cook the head with, literally the head, with everything else. All right, but of the words cut and divide, the ram into pieces, Onkelos translated the Hebrew word netahiv, pieces, his or its pieces, as limbs, and the verb tenatach, you shall cut, as divide. Some believe that Onkelos did this because of the Babylonian Talmud in Chulin 11a, which states that each division must be an entire limb, not limbs cut up into pieces. But this teaching is actually nonsense, since Onkelos never entered the arena of ha-lahaik. In other words, the way the Jews do it today is what I was just talking about. This man did it the Jewish way. Everything is divided up. The the leg is divided as a leg. The kidney is separate. The liver is separate. The breast is separate. The ribs, everything is set up in a certain way, and no bone is ever broken the way he did it. And that's, I think, what they call that kosher, even though I wouldn't go that far. Just because you cut it up a certain way does not make it kosher. But I believe that's pretty much most of the standard there. So I don't think that Onkelos did it for that reason, because this is way before any of that became a thing. Anywho, in verse 18, the altar, all the ram and make burn you, burnt offerings he to Yahweh, sent soothing, burnt offerings to Yahweh it. So, Hamizbeach, or Hamizbecha, the altar, et kol, so all ha'ayil, all of the ram, vehi katarta, and make you burn. So you burn all of the lamb, olah, that's the burnt offering, who, which is here it, la Yahweh. So the whole burnt offering is for God. Reach, that's a scent or an odor. Nihoach, which is soothing, satisfactory, it's delightful. Isheh, a burnt, you'll burn it. La Yahweh, to God, who, you'll burn it to God. So your translation, you make the whole ram burnt on the altar, a burnt offering to Yahweh, a soothing scent, a burnt offering to Yahweh. So they're obviously trying to make something of more importance, because they've said that it's a burnt offering to Yahweh twice. All right. Verse 19. And to take you the ram the second, and lean Aharon and sons his, hand them upon head the ram. So it's going to be all words that we've already had, well, except for one. We may have already had that, but I don't know. Velakachta, and to take you. So you take, you receive, you fetch, all the same thing. Et ha'ayil, the ram, it's what you think of. Ha-sheni, the second. It's the word for two. It's the word for again. It's the word for second. So now you'll take the second ram, the samach, and lean. You're going to place your, ultimately it's going to tell you that you place the hand of Aharon and his sons on it, right? Because Aharon, Uvanav, and his sons, et Yedehim, the yod in plural, their hands, al, which is upon, Rosh, that's the head of the animal, Ha'ayil, the head of the ram. So, and you take the second ram, and Aharon and his sons will lean their hands on the ram's head. Of the words, the second ram, Onkelos' Shemot by Drazin and Wagner says the second ram is identified in verse 26 and in Leviticus 8:23 as the lamb of sacrifice. It actually has a name, the lamb of sacrifice, the second lamb. But remember, going back to that same idea of this isn't about Aharon and his sons, everybody gathering around this little bitty lamb and all of them trying to get their hands on it. This is about this one is going to be slaughtered. And it doesn't make clear, did Moshe do the actual slaughter? Did Aharon do it? Did his sons do it? Did they all do it together? Was it a specific combination? None of that's even spoken of. So we don't know. Anyone who tells you they do know is just deciding that they want to know something, and that's, you know what I'm saying? It's not there. All right, so verse 20. The ram, and to take you from blood it, and put them upon tip ear, Aharon, and upon tip ear son his, the right hand, and upon thumb hand them, the right hand, and upon thumb feet, the right hand, and scatter you the blood upon the altar round about. Again, we've had most of these words. Meshachata, So now you're going to slaughter. That's the slaying of the animal. Remember, if we would just change this word to barbecue, people wouldn't be so freaked out by it. They just think it's all icky. But it's because we don't slaughter our own animals anymore. We go to the store and just buy the part of it that we want, right? Anyway, back then, your priest was your butcher. Wouldn't suggest you do those things nowadays. Although in Jewish delis and stuff like that, the butcher does tend to be an actual rabbi. So, maybe you can get away with going and getting your Bible advice from your butcher, if it's all set up right. All right, so you're going to slay et ha'ayil. You're going to slay the ram, which means you're going to cut it up, just like it's already told you how to cut it up. Velakachta, and you're going to fetch, you're going to bring to yourself midamo, from the blood, venatata, and you're going to place it, you're going to set it, you're going to establish it, al, which is upon, tenuch, on the tip, the extremity of the ear. So it becomes an argument, is this bouncy bottom piece the tip, or is it this one over here, the pushy inny outy part? I don't know what to call these things, because some people don't have the floppy part. Sometimes it's all hooked together, and is that different because it doesn't wiggle like mine does? And I do think that's where the argument came about and why it came about. So it's the tip ozen of the ear. So what exactly is the tip of the ear? That becomes a big deal. Then aharon, well, it shouldn't have, but it does. Aharon, you know who that is. Ve'al, and upon, so you're going to put it on his ear, tip of his ear. And tenuch, that's the tip, ozen of the ear, banav, of his sons. Ha-yemanit, Yemen, you hear it? Ha-yemanit, Yemen, you hear it? The right hand. Ve'al, and upon bohen, the thumb, yadam, of the hand. Ha-yemanit, in the right hand, ve'al, and upon bohen, the thumb, raglam. That's releg, the feet in plural, raglam. That's your feet. So it's on your big toe. Hayamanit, well, literally it's right hand, but it's the right foot in this case. The zarachta, and scatter. You remember the scatter, dip it and sling it. I was talking about that a while ago. Et hadam, the blood. Al, which is upon, ha-misba'ak, on the altar, saviv, all around it. So you have slaughter the ram, and you take from its blood and put it on the tip of Aharon's right ear, and on the tip of his son's right ear, and on the thumb of their right hand, and on the big toe of their right foot. And you scatter the blood round about the altar. Rashi wrote that it was the middle gristle part of the ear, so he thinks it's the inny part. Sadia says it is the orb of the ear, which is, of course, much more likely. I agree with once again, disagree with Rashi. But I see why the argument came about. All right, so in verse 21, and to take you from the blood that upon the altar, and from fat, the anointing, and make spatter you upon Aharon, and upon garment you, spatter upon Aharon, and upon garment his, and upon son his, and upon garment sons his, with it, or he, or him, and holy he, and garment his, and sons his, and garment sons his, with he. All right, well, that's not as bad as it sounded. Belakachta, and to take you. So you take, you fetch, you adhere something. Mean, there's your word mean, from, a part taken from the whole. Hadam. So you take from the blood, asher, that all that is upon, hamizba'ach, that's on the blood, on the altar, umishemen, and from the fat, that's literally the fat of the animal, hamishcha, which is the word for anointing. It's a part or a portion. It's where we get the word Mashiach, hamishcha, anyway. It is Mashiach. That's the root word. Then it's vehizeta, and make spatter or splatter you. It's to leap, to exalt with joy, used of fluids, to be sprinkled and spattered. All, which is upon Aharon, so you sprinkle it on Aaron, all, and upon begadav, beged, the garments, his garments. Begadav is his garments. It's the clothing, the stuff that they've made for him to wear. You're going to sprinkle this blood on it. All, and upon Banav, and upon his sons. All, and upon Big Day, Beged, garments, upon Banav, of the garments of his sons. Oto, his sons who are with him, which, again, this is not about, okay, so he had 2 kids, or he had 4 kids, or he had, however many kids he had. It's not about that. It's about the sons, the Levites that are going to work as the priests that are with him. Those are the sons with him. So there could have been hundreds or could have been thousands. It's not about the 2 that were born from him and their mother. You know what I'm saying? It's not about that. Then it says, Ve Kadash, and so that's, and holy, who, so he'll be holy, Uvenadav, and his garments, and Uvanav, and his sons, Uvigdei, and the garments, Banav, of his sons. So all of that stuff become Oto, with him. So all of that stuff and all of them become holy. You take from the blood that is on the altar. Now, you're not taking it from the animal. You took it from the animal to the altar. Now you're taking it from the altar to Aharon and his sons. So take you from the blood that is on the altar and from the anointing fat, because that's what the fat is for, is anointing, and make it spatter on Aharon and on his garments and on his sons and on his sons' garments with him. And he will be holy, he and his garments, and his sons and the garments of his sons with him. At that point, they are now purified enough to work in the service of God. And you remember, I know from my earlier and other teachings that it jumped out of my head. I'm sorry. I'll think of it some other time, I hope. It just jumped out. I have no idea. Sorry. Verse 22, and to take you from the ram, the fat, and the butt, B-U-T-T, and the fat, the hidden, the midst, and overhang the liver, and to the kidneys, and the fat that on them, and thigh the right for ram setting he. Velakakta, and to take you, and so you take, you receive, you fetch, mean from ha'ayil, from the ram, ha-chelev, the fat from the ram, the ha'alya, and the butt, that's the thick part back there where the tail of the sheep is. Ve'et, and ha-chelev, and the fat, ha-mehase, that is hidden, et ha-kerev, in the interior part, ve'et yoteret, the overhanging, the extra, ha-kaved, that's the liver. We're all the way back to that's the fat that comes from the backside and the fat that comes from above the liver, ve'et and shete, and the 2 hakelayot, the kidneys. So we talked about it had that fat on it. So you're going to get the fat that's from the back end, the butt, and you're going to take some fat that's from the liver and the fat that's from the two kidneys. It says ve'et ha'elev, and the fat asher, that alehen, that is on them, ve'et, and shuk, and the thigh, hayamim, the right thigh, ki, for el, which is ram, miluim, the ram of the inauguration. I talked about that earlier. This is where it actually calls the second one, gives it this name, the ram of inauguration, which means it. So you take from the fat of the butt of the ram, and the fat covering the midst, and the remainder of the liver, and the fat that is on the two kidneys, and the right thigh, for it is the ram of inauguration. Onkelos translated miluim, the inauguration, as korban, which means sacrifice. Rashi translated it as peace offering, which it's okay for both of them to say these things. They're just using different words to mean essentially the same thing. If this is a sacrifice that covers the sin for the people, that initiates God being able to be with the people, then this is a peace sacrifice. This is a sacrifice that brings man and God together in right standing. That's a peace offering. And korban is the word for sacrifice. So it's all good. Nobody's right or wrong here. Everybody's right and nobody's wrong. Let's just say it that way. All right, so we go to 23. And round bread 1, and cake bread, oil 1, and wafer 1, basket the unleavened bread that two faces Yahweh. All right, so now we get into something different. Vehi kar, and round, circular, so it's around lechem. It's round bread that is round. It can be round like, one of them big pieces of bread you see that's round like this, or it could be one that's like a tunnel, like a tunnel. What am I looking for? Like a what? Like a loaf if it's round. There's no specifics on how the round has to look. It just has to be round. Achat, so one round bread. Then it says vechalat, and cake, especially such as was offered in sacrifices, such as cakes having been perforated. Lechem, so here's a bread cake. Shemen, here's the word for oil. Achat, so one of them is going to